Hi, I'm Amber Hartman, and the vulnerable population I decided to study are individuals with eating disorders. In this presentation, I will go over various health concerns that affect those with eating disorders. On this first slide, I just talk about the description of the population that I am studying. So as stated above, there are many different types of eating disorders. These may include, but are not limited to, anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and rumination disorder. Each of these disorders affect these individuals in a negative way. They are not getting the nutrition that is needed for their body to grow and develop the way that it should. These people have a very unhealthy relationship with food, and the hard part about it is these people don't see it that way until it is brought to their attention or until their health is severely affected. Size of the population. This is hard to get this information, and it may not be super accurate just because the number that is recorded is those that are either diagnosed with it or get help for their disorder. So I'm sure the number is way higher than what I was able to find. And it was pretty difficult to even find these numbers that I did. There aren't many statistics out there for the size of population of individuals with an eating disorder. But I was able to find that there are about 30 million people in the nation that suffer with some form of eating disorder, and internationally there are about 90 million people. But like I said, there are most likely lots more people with an eating disorder that go undiagnosed because they have not seeked out the help that they need for their disorder. Moving on to social determinants of health, there are 5 determinant areas that make up this social determinants of health. These include economic stability, education, social and community context, health and healthcare, neighborhood, and built environment. So it's pretty obvious that the social determinant of health that is most affected or affects individuals the most is health and healthcare. One of the main components of health and being healthy is maintaining a well-balanced diet, and these individuals are unable to do so. Their health is being severely compromised by their eating habits. Each of these social determinants of health areas contribute to their condition. First up, economic stability. They may not be employed, and this leads to not having housing and food stability, which is a result of living in poverty. So if you don't have a job, then you don't have the money to pay for the food to nourish your body, and that can be a contributing factor to eating disorders. Moving on to education, this one may not be a huge factor, but it could contribute to the one we just talked about, economic stability. Getting a quality education sets you up for success in the future. And if you have a good quality education, you'll be able to have a good job and be able to support yourself and be able to provide yourself with the food that you need to nourish your body. Next is social and community context. This includes discrimination, and discrimination may be anything. It could be gender, it could be race, age, your sexual orientation, anything. And when people are discriminated against because of these things, it can affect an individual and make them feel less important. And this can affect their mental health and their overall well-being. And this can lead to eating disorders. I will go more into detail a few slides down about how this affects them. Like we discussed before, health and healthcare, if these people don't have proper or access to proper health care, they won't get the help that they need to overcome this disorder, and it can really affect their health. Neighborhood and built environment. This includes having access to food that supports a healthy eating pattern, and some of these people may not have this luxury, which contributes to their disorder. Their environmental conditions can also affect their mental state, which can lead to an eating disorder. Specific concerns. Every aspect of these individuals' lives are affected. Their physical, psychosocial, mental, emotional, all of it. Physical, pretty obvious, their bodies are not getting the proper nutrition they need for growth and development, and they are unable to function on a normal level. Psychosocial, they know, or some of them don't know, that they have an issue, and they may be embarrassed by this eating disorder and not want to be around other people and fear that they'll be judged, and this may lead to isolation, and this can contribute to their disorder and make it worse, possibly. Mental and emotional. Most likely there is some form of mental or emotional condition that is going on that leads them to having these eating patterns and behaviors. It's also possible that some event has happened in the past, and that is what got them to this place with having an eating disorder. But I will go over into more detail on the next slide about this. The root cause. So I will be going over why they're vulnerable and why they have an eating disorder. So they are very vulnerable for many reasons. First off, their nutrition is so poor, and which makes their bodies so weak. And this includes not only all their organ systems, but as well as their immune system, and they aren't able to fight off illnesses as well as those that are or have good nutrition. They are vulnerable because of their unstable mental state. There is a reason behind the eating disorder, and many times it is because of a mental illness. Their emotional status is most likely unstable as well. They may not have the best relationships with people because of their disorder. They have many things stacked against them. So moving on to the root cause of why they have an eating disorder. There may be a few different reasons for having one, but one reason maybe because they were overweight or different in any way, like I said before, gender, age, sexual orientation, whatever it may be. They will be teased, and this can lead to weight gain or binge eating or extreme weight control measures. I found in a website that on national eating disorders, and they state that low self-esteem is a common characteristic of individuals with eating disorders. One of the main reasons or root causes is having a co-occurring disorder, particularly a mental disorder. It states in there that a study of more than 2,400 individuals hospitalized for an eating disorder found that 97% had one or more co-occurring conditions. And this included 94% had a co-occurring mood disorder, mostly major depression. 56% were diagnosed with anxiety disorders, and 20% had obsessive-compulsive disorders. There was also 22% that had post-traumatic stress disorder, and 22% had an alcohol or substance use disorder. So that is the main reason behind having an eating disorder. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a pyramid that shows the different levels of needs that human beings have, and it starts with the very basic of food and water and all that good stuff. So individuals with eating disorders are not meeting any level of need. And on a website I found it said, according to Maslow, a person must satisfy each lower level before moving into a higher level need. For example, a person would not seek out self-actualization without first having food and water. When a need is not met, a person would move back down the hierarchy until he or she is at a level where the need is met. So their anticipated functional level would be very low. Since the lowest and most basic level is not being met, they are unable to function and thrive like they should be able to. And since they are not meeting the most basic level and fueling their bodies properly, they are most likely to get sick more often and way more easily than the average person. Those with eating disorders tend to not produce as many white blood cells, and these white blood cells fight off infection, so they most likely are more prone to getting sick and obtaining certain infections. I was unable to find much research regarding specific communicable diseases, but they certainly are at higher risk. These individuals are at a higher risk for complication, but not necessarily non-communicable diseases. But going system by system, there are many complications that come along with eating disorders. First off, with the cardiovascular system, by consuming fewer calories, the body breaks down its own tissues, and muscles are the first tissue to be broken down, and the most important muscle in your body is your heart. And when your heart is not pumping properly, your pulse and your blood pressure begin to drop, and the risk of heart failure rises when those levels sink lower and lower. And when you're purging or vomiting or using laxatives, it depletes your bodies of important chemicals that are called electrolytes, and electrolyte imbalances can lead to irregular heartbeats and possible heart failure, which leads to death. Moving on to the GI system, slow digestion can lead to constipation, and that can lead to impaction and even worse. Long-term use of laxatives can cause dependence on these laxatives, and it will damage the nerve endings in your bowels, and you'll be unable to move food along like you used to be able to. Frequent vomiting can wear down the esophagus. Neurological, the body's neurons require an insulating protective layer of lipids, which are able to conduct electricity. Inadequate fat intake can damage this protective layer, causing numbness and tingling in hands, feet, and other extremities. There are many other issues that come along with eating disorders, but these are just a few. Self-harm and self-care deficits. This population is definitely at risk for both of these. Even just having a eating disorder qualifies as a self-care deficit because they are not fueling their bodies with the nutrients that are so desperately needed. In a journal article I found, it stated that the vast majority of longer-term follow-up studies indicate that people with anorexia nervosa have an almost tenfold risk of dying compared to healthy people the same age and sex as them. Mortality in eating disorders is predominantly related to malnutrition, methods of weight control, and suicide. It also said that people suffering from anorexia may be at an increased risk for self-harm and suicide. The reason for this is stated a couple slides back, but most people with an eating disorder have a coexisting mental illness, and this causes them to act on these behaviors. They have a low self-esteem, so hurting themselves is what they feel like they deserve. So what can be done to mitigate this harm? Well, first things first, they need to first be admitted to a hospital or facility to become medically stable. We need to get them eating again and get some calories in them so that they can gain some weight. After they're medically stable, they need to be sent to a psychiatric unit to help them sort through feelings and help them cope and treat their mental illnesses. After their inpatient treatment, they need to be sent home with an outpatient plan to follow up and help them to be successful and safe. This population isn't necessarily at risk for harming others or for others to harm them. There may be quite a few people out there with eating disorders that we have no idea that they have a disorder. It may be the coexisting mental illness that causes them to harm others, but not the eating disorder itself. Thank you for listening to my presentation on eating disorders, and I hope that you learned something new. Here are my references.